Welcome back to Between the Levees. I'm joined here on the show yet again by Captain Jimmy Cheatham, and he is joined by a surprise guest today, Chief Tony Bowden. They both run on the motor vessel JOHN D Nugent, and we're going to hear a little bit more about them and some other friends that we've made on this podcast. Jimmy and Tony, thank you very much for joining me.
Glad for having us, Tim.
Well, we were talking offline just now. I've got the Matheny Boys publishing April 6th.
Boy, that's a hell of a brew right there.
This episode will come out a few weeks after that, but tell me about the connection with the Mathenys, and I think you mentioned their father.
Yeah, I worked with their dad on the co-op ambassador several years ago. I don't know, 3 or 4 years probably on the old ambassador. And I worked with Marcus some. I never did get to work with Ty, but I should know him. I know of him a lot. Met him a couple of times.
Well, real quick, before we get into the topics that you wanted to get into, Tony, how many years have you been in the industry?
21 now.
I think it was Ty Matheny that mentioned, I think it was, that they'd love to see more engineers on the program. I've had a very small handful. Maybe we'll get you on here one of these days, talk through your 21 years. But in the meantime, how long have you folks known each other?
Roughly 4.
About 4 years, yeah.
Yeah.
How's that been going?
It's a love-hate relationship. We love to hate each other on the boat, but we get along pretty good on the bank.
Yeah.
You know, it's that Captain Chief thing. You know,
Cat and dog.
Yeah. You know, they're pretty much useless, you know, lazy. They don't do nothing. They walk around with a coffee cup, you know, that old time scenario that you hear. It's actually true. But I think he sleeps more than he walks around.
Yeah.
What do you think?
And one of them just goes like this.
Yeah.
Has that one finger going.
Well,
You.
sometimes I do too when I get excited.
It's a 2-finger one. That's a bad day for that deck crew.
Well, I guess he just knows how to do the job better, Jimmy. I don't know, man.
I tell you what, we'll get into more of this later into the interview. Tony is one of the last ones of the old chiefs, as myself, kind of one of the last ones of the older pilot generation.
Well, before we get into that, Tony, fill me in a little bit on your career. Where'd you start? Do you have any good old stories from old engineers that trained you? And what year did you get your start?
I started in 2000 out on the barges. We just had a house that was overlooked the Lock and Dam there in Keokuk, Iowa. I didn't know anything about them, but they went past the house and, well, we waved at them, swatted golf balls at them. Well, I don't want to tell you what the girls did to them. So I said, it sure looked like a fun job. I was tired of the office and the whole bit, so I wanted to try to ride up and down the river like Huck Finn. It sure looked like a lot of fun. The job used to be fun. It used to be a lot of fun. Anymore, it's got political and not too much office. But I was on deck for 3 years. I started out when I was 36 years old. So I'm kind of, an old man that started out on the deck. But I've always enjoyed tinkering with engines and tinkering around and the whole bit. I just never seen an engine that big, but it was just one that kind of fascinated me. Going to the wheelhouse, if you did not have to deal with everybody, I would have went to the wheelhouse. But
you steered some, didn't you?
Yeah, I steered some. I probably got 500-600 hours steering time on me. But it is just, you got to deal with the office, you got to deal with Coast Guard, you got to deal with dumb deckhands, you got to deal with whiny cook, you got to deal with, that engineer. It's just a true story. So I don't want to have to do all that. Dealing with me most of the time, well, that's sometimes more than enough. So, but for the most part, I like the job.
Well, good to go. Jimmy, it looks like our first visit published about a year ago. How's life been since we last spoke?
Pretty good. Still battling low water and trying to make miles out there.
Well, we mentioned the Mathenys. Tell me about Brandon Phillips, where you met him and your relationship with him.
Oh Lord, I've known Brandon, met him at Artco, I don't know how many years ago. Brandon, colorful fella. I'm gonna put it that way. Full of stories, gift of gab, decided he wanted to be a captain pilot or a pilot captain, and nobody wanted to take him under the wing, but I did. I stuck my neck out there and said, let's go do it. I've known Brandon for a long time, and he's turned out to be a hell of a wheelman, in fact, better than myself.
Any good stories from his time as a steersman for you?
Oh Lord, we could do about 4 or 5 episodes of the stories on him. I think one of the funniest stories was, and this was on the Arkansas River, and he told this in his first interview, I think, about the cows. The look on his face that night was priceless when he almost ran over the cows, trying to stop in dead water, shallow water. Yeah. Another one was Brandon's landing. We was up on the upper and high water, and it was running pretty good. Had to pull over for some southbound traffic, and he didn't quite make it up far enough and got caught in one of the suck holes. Yeah, that was his first. Yeah, that was his first experience me with an elevated voice. Let's put it that way.
Maybe we'll reconvene with him on the show one of these days, you and him together.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can line that up. So how did you want to start this, sir? You sent a list of 3 topics: state of the infrastructure of the rivers, some crewing issues, their qualifications and retention, and of course the boatmanship's pride that you see possibly lessened over the years. Where do you want to get into first?
Let's start with the infrastructure of the river. You know, over the course of since the lock and dams were built, there hadn't been a whole hell of a lot done with them. You know, annual maintenance, stuff like that. You know, those locks and dams, most of them, like on the upper Mississippi, as an example, were built in the 1930s. From about 34 to about 38, 40. And dams are becoming older. Everything, you know, with age starts to deteriorate. And they're starting to have signs of aging. You know, thank God we did get some infrastructure money this past, in this current administration, but it's like putting a Band-Aid on a big open wound. This should have been done years ago.
Yesterday, March 29th, yesterday, the Port Island lock shut down for estimated 3 weeks due to a bad hinge. And this morning I saw a report that the industrial lock in New Orleans just shut down for a bad hinge. Hopefully just a matter of days there. But where do you have the biggest problems in the system? Where do y'all run these days?
Well, primarily the Nugent runs the upper Illinois and Ohio rivers, sometimes mid-lower. But when the season is at its peak, lock delay is one of the biggest things that costs the company quite a bit of money. Oh Lord, I'm trying to think of for instance. Well, let me back up here and think. One of the you know, 24 and 25, or 25 is fixing. Well, they're already started a 1,200-foot chamber project there, so it'll be a single lockage. We have 3 1,200-foot chambers on the upper Mississippi: Keokuk, 19, Lock and Dam, 26 and 27, Mill Price, and right there at Granite City. It would be nice to see opportunities to put in waiting cells, mooring cells for a couple of the locks that we really needed, like above lock 11 and lock 14. Man, there's so much that we could go into on this, Tim. It's unreal. I really wouldn't know where to start. The river conditions itself from St. Paul to St. Louis Over the years, the environmentalists have pushed and pushed and pushed and got their way. It's almost impossible to dredge anymore like we should, and we're losing channel width, we're losing channel depth. So that's going to, in turn, cost the companies extremely large amounts of revenue.
Where are 24 and 25?
24 is there at
Winfield, Missouri.
that's 25 is at Winfield, and lot 24 is at Louisiana. Or
Clarksville.
Clarksville.
What
Yeah,
mileposts? What mileposts?
I can't remember right
Oh.
offhand, Tim. I'd have to look it up.
No big deal. Do you have any more to add about the infrastructure of the rivers?
Oh, a great deal. Mainly, just an example with the Upper Mississippi is the dredging. At one time we were bringing 15 loaded barges in and out of St. Paul. Now we can barely do 12. And as the environmentalists keep getting their ways, and I'm very pro-environment myself. In fact, I'm with a group to Drive Outdoors. That's one of the things that we are, ambassadors to environment. And something's going to have to be done, or we're not going to continue running on the upper.
What's the issue 12 versus 15? Is it length or width?
Length. A lot of the turns they have reduced down. They keep pulling the buoy lines in instead of going there and cutting out the corners and dredging, making a wider channel and keeping it at a constant 9 foot. They pulled the buoy lines in closer, restricting the turn. And when you do that, you just can't swing them all around the corner.
How would you best recommend that the Army Corps of Engineers address all these issues?
Well, politicians, we fight a double-edged sword out there. It seems like, Tim. I do a lot of Corps meetings myself. I listen to what they say. They combat and battle politicians when it comes to the environmental groups. Our biggest problem, I think, is the lobbyists in Washington, pushing a lot of this stuff. The funding is usually there appropriated for us, but the thing is they have a trouble to where they can put the dredge spoilage. A lot of times they won't let them just go in and use the big dredges that suck from the bottom. They use dippers, like big track holes, and dig out the channel, which takes a long time to do. And it's not very efficient way of dredging, but it does keep the river open for us.
Well, the environmental lobbyists which ones are causing issues for us in Washington?
Mostly your environmentalists. Mostly the environmentalists. They go in there, they've got a lot of money power behind them. Then you've got the greed of the politicians, like in the St. Paul, Rock Island districts. Instead of going up there and digging out a channel like they could, they have to find permanent areas they can put the spoilage. Sometimes it has to be trucked a few miles away from the river, even, to what I understand. And they pay millions of dollars to dump foliage on these places that's reserved for it. And it just shouldn't be an issue like that.
Where would you suggest they put all that stuff?
Well, like here on the lower Mississippi, you've got, like the Jared Hurley was one of the bigger ones that come in and dredge, and they just dump it either under or on top of another sandbar that's already out there, or dump it out of the channel where it'll be carried away. I mean, that would be the best thing to do. But they say there's too much contaminants in the sediment at the bottom of the river to do that. But I don't know. If they can't do it up there, but they can do it down here, what's the problem? Is my big question. And there again, we've already lost St. Anthony Falls lock and dam. I seen some videos the other day that after closing the upper 2 locks there on the Snake River, now they're coming out with this thing where lock and dams are big environmental issue with methane gas. They're saying that it's creating a tremendous amount of methane gas and comparing it to other sources. And now where's that going to go? Or will the environmentalists get a hold of that and try to force us to shut down all the locking dams? I mean, we have people in Washington right now that want to revert the upper Mississippi back to its natural course. Not only are we going to destroy ecosystem that has developed over 100 years, you're going to take away people's water, major cities. I mean, there's a hell of a downturn to that. Where will this go? When will it stop? When will it reverse? How can we as the industry fight it? It's like I feel about American politics today. We're going to have to get off our tails and be heard in Washington. People like Chief, myself, my colleagues, my peers, people coming up in the industry, our deck crew, retirees, going to have to take the time and start wailing Washington with emails and calls and say, we need to put a stop to this and reverse it. I think the American people has got too passive. Industry, in one respect, has got too passive. Now it's becoming a major issue.
Any follow-up thoughts on that, Chief Bowden?
No, it says everything Jim told you, I really got to totally agree with in the whole bit. It is just to me, we live up in northern Missouri, dipped out the end of our cove, and it is just one of those things that when they claim that the silt in the mud is a hazardous material, I think we've just gone too far on trying to protect things. It's silly. I says the track hoe operator that I had, he did a little work down there at the river. He just dumped a bunch of riprap in there so he could set his track hoe out on there and do the work. About 3 days later, he dipped the rock out and was just going to put it back along the bank. And he had to pay disposal fees of all that riprap that only sat in the river for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
That is silly.
Absolutely.
So I don't know what we can do about it, but the common sense has just left the building.
Well, what are the hazards they're claiming that exist in the silt?
A lot that it's been a few years since I actually read a study or an analytical outlay of the contaminants. A lot of the runoff of farmland. This is like, it's kind of like a play on words to me with this. If you've got pesticides, herbicides, and chemical runoff, if you're using that on America's farmland, and believe me, I'm a farmer myself. If that's causing some of the issue, along with other sediment from, they say power plants, other foundries up and down the river and businesses, chemical companies, if that's the problem, then let's identify these problems and work on getting them cleaned up. I mean, if it's a hazard to dig out of a pond, or if it's a hazard to dig out of the river, but we're still using these same chemicals in daily operations, don't you think it's a hazard to us, even more so? And, some don't make a lot of sense when it comes to the politics of it.
Do you know Captain David Greer?
I know the name.
Name.
Did you see the episodes I did with him at the end of last year?
No, sir, I did not. I missed that one.
He mentioned it's about 6 hours worth of a bunch of stuff. But he mentioned that similar to what you're saying, that I think if I may quote him directly, it's fertilizers and pig shit washing into the river, washing all the way down to the Gulf and creating a gigantic dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes.
I'd love to have you back on with him and talk through some of these issues for sure. But aside from changing the materials used in these practices, what else could we do to improve things?
You know, we have done what we can with technology as far as operation of the vessels. We have, when it comes to even to our gray water, we have very little of anything pollutant that runs off.
There is no gray
If it
water,
rains,
gray water,
that
so.
is the only gray water that we have run off this day and time on the vessels that we ride. But yet that's not good enough for government. We're going to have to back down big government somehow, some way, and it's going to take an effort of the American people coming together. Of course, we're going to have to find a common ground with environmentalists. And again, this has become big business. It's not so much the fight of a good environment as it is, well, see how much money we can make off of this. So when you start talking about big money, you know, it's easy to get pushed aside and nothing done. But we're going to have to find a common ground and start redeveloping our 25,000 navigable miles of waterways here in the United States to keep them utilized, not only for our own intercommerce, but to supply the world with food and to keep these companies in business.
And money has certainly a good and bad, but
Yes, sir, it is.
well, another issue you mentioned that is plaguing the industry these days is the crewing, the qualifications of the individuals and them their retention, staying around in the business. What have you seen from the beginning of your career to now, and how different it is, and how much more difficult maybe it is to find?
Tim, I'm going to go back to my growing up years. You know, I mentioned my first interview, I'm third generation. I grew up in the industry. I've seen a time where industry, the companies, treated their workers very well. Then it got times where it was slacked off and they were treated like secondhand rag goods. You know, if a boat tied up, they laid everybody off. You know, they still made it pay. They have taken retirement pension plans. They've taken holidays. They've done so much taken, but they demand more and more. I can remember a time when my dad worked for Huffman Towing Company and Gladders. It was two other ones that were really good companies I remember. In 1973, they were kind of fearful that our levee system here was going to fail where I live. And some of the company heads actually told, if you have family in these areas, take them on the boat with you. And we sat over there on the boat at Cairo with my dad for several days until the threat was over. Would they do that today? No. Very doubtful. Of course, we've lost a lot of the mom and pop companies like that. We've got large companies now, good and bad. It's maybe has kept us competitive in a world market. But as we've progressed, I noticed, you know, I was talking to another retired captain I got highly respect for, Captain John Arnold. I talk a lot about him, with him about the old days. And, you know, from about 1980 to about 2000, 20-year span, there wasn't hardly a pilot made, there wasn't a chief made, there wasn't a boat built, there wasn't a barge built, and they was making the gravy. Pilots and chiefs were a dime a dozen. I don't know if the companies failed to look into the future to see what the needs might be going into the 2000s. But all of a sudden, we have a demand for vessels to be built, barges to be built, and crewing. What has happened to our crews? We could, I got a friend of mine, she works in HR. We had a really good conversation about this not long ago. And we'll go more into about that. But I don't know how we can all come together and make it better, but there's going to have to be a point in time to where the crews and industry is going to have to come down and say, sit down together. What are we going to do to make this better and this industry survive? I've talked to a number of people. In fact, I was in Paducah last weekend I went over and visited with Maritime Throwdown, Kenny, and visited with a lot of wheelmen over there, a couple company owners, and they all kind of agree with me. If we don't do something within the next 5 years, 20 to 25 years from now, we're not going to have the industry that we have today, because we're not going to have the manpower out there to do it. Myself, I'm going to speak for Chief too, and when we're done, we're done. We're not going back. I mean, he's probably got a couple more years left. He's planning on doing his thing. I've got maybe 5 or 6, if that long. I'm done. So who's going to fill our shoes? They're making a lot of pilots, yes, right now. And they're pushing a lot of pilots out there that shouldn't be pushed to stand to watch. They're pushing a lot of new hires into positions to where they shouldn't be. And what we've lost already is the quality of wheelmen to train, the quality of mates to train the deck crew, the quality of chief engineers to train upcoming oilers and engineers. Hell, a lot of companies have been even done away with the oiler program or assistant program. And there's no stepping stones there for nothing. Yes, it is an expense, but is it an expense that we're going to pay now? Or are you going to really put yourself in dire straits 20 years from now?
Do you feel that the industry and maybe the what was I trying to say? Just had the word and I lost it.
I do that sometimes too, Tim. It's okay.
I
It'll
do
get
it a
worse
lot.
the older you get.
Not sometimes. I do it a lot.
Oh, you got lot timers, not sometimes.
The young timers.
Yeah. Do you feel that the industry and maybe the government regulators have, to some degree, forgotten about the mariner these days?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
An example, I'm very pro Davy Jones Act. When was the last time mariners were called to voice an opinion and the Davy Jones Act being updated? Politics has forgot us. They sneak in stuff on their own, make it barely known public. By the time we find out about it, it's already law. That's not representation. And I believe the companies make a lot of changes landside better that might benefit them. It damn sure don't benefit us on the river end.
What new regulations, policies, and procedures have come into play in the last, say, 5 to 10 years that you think are, to some degree, detrimental to your life out there on the water?
Well, one of the subchapter M has made it more complicated, Tim, for everybody out there. I mean, from my standpoint as a captain to the chief to our crew, I mean, there's a lot that we have to maintain and upkeep. And with that, lots of training, lots of education. And the big thing is these new laws have just about run all of the little people out. There's no little people no more. They're getting fewer and fewer.
What differences do you see these days for new deck crew? How long have you had the same crew on your boat?
Over the last year, I have got one regular crew member. I don't have a mate. I didn't have a mate this last trip. I had way more inexperienced guys than I needed. Yeah, it was, this last trip was very nerve-trying to me.
What are the biggest challenges you're facing with these people that are coming on board and meeting you for the first time?
Well, a lot of them work ethic. A lot of them that come, there's nobody left to train these guys once they get back to the boats. I mean, there's so much inexperience that we don't have enough experienced people to train the new hire people coming into the industry. At least that's what has been on my boat the last couple of trips. And I talked to a lot of other pilots and wheelmen, they're saying the same thing.
Well, what about you, Chief? Do you see any potential in the next few generations for getting in the engine room?
They have really slowed that down. I said, it is just one of those things that I think that they ought to start trying to think about replacing this older generation. I know it is a big expense to the company to go back there for 3 years and train a young man. But within 2.5 years, they're going to have to replace me. They're going to replace a lot of us older generation. I just do not think that they have the manpower to take care of the problem yet. So what is happening is they get behind and way behind, and they will not. They are losing all the knowledge. That's the problem, you know, like with Jimmy, myself, that have been out there for a long time. And then you replace us with a young man. He just does not have the experience and the knowledge and the years that we do. But right now they are trying to defer until you absolutely have to. It is like we had a kid that was, you know, the first time, you know, worked on the river. His first trip, he ran lead. This is just unheard of, but you didn't have anybody else. This is the problem I'm seeing, you know, with coming back to the engine room or going to the wheelhouse. You know, we can kind of talk the deck crew through it. But once you are the man, there is nobody to talk you through it. So that's why I think they need to invest in their employees a little better than they have been. I know it is a big money commitment for down the road, but you know, it's a pay me now or pay me later thing. And I just think it's kind of silly but that's me personally. You know, I'm not the one that's in charge of their purse strings. So, but I think if you did a little better job of training and a little better job of trying to move people up to start replacing this old generation to have the knowledge, they would be a lot better off.
Which they should have done this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And you cannot tell me they didn't see this coming.
You know, as
just
baby
can't tell me they
boomers.
didn't.
Yeah, us baby boomers. You know, I mean, we're, you know, running on the tail end of the baby boomers. But right now we are a big percentage of the workforce out there for another 3 to 5 years. And then most of us,
the tail end of the drift off of that would be 15 to 20 years from now. They're all going to be gone. So where does that leave industry in the maritime world? Kind of scary to think about it, Tim.
Do you think the advent of AI and remote controls may change things in the future?
Not unless you want to see a lot of mishaps. The thing of when you're dealing with the Western rivers or rivers in general where there's a current involved, I don't see AI ever playing a role or remote control because you have to sit there, feel it, see it, and experience it to know what to do. You're not going to get that on a TV screen, computer module, You're just not going to get it there. And there's actually technology being developed leading toward that, but it's going to be many years down the road before it's even feasible to even try it. I don't think they'd ever get by with it on the Western rivers. Now, seagoing vessels, open water, yes, and they're doing some of that now. But far as our inland waterways, not so much. Or you'll have to have somebody to get on a lock or make a bridge per, you'll have to have somebody there to do each one of them things. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, aside from industry investment in personnel, I guess what other solutions would you imagine presenting if you had that opportunity?
Well, as far as presenting something to industry, management,
Industry, regulators, whomever, yeah.
Boy, it's a tough one on regulators because I don't believe in big government. I think we're over-regulated now. When you've got regulatory commissions governing other regulatory commissions, it's getting pretty steep. Subchapter M to us in many ways has been a good thing, but it's forced companies to spend the money on the boats to bring them up to par where they should be now. There's a lot of unnecessary money that has had to be spent that I didn't think due to regulation needed to be. Companies, investors, owners, I don't know where they want to stand with the future. I've noticed throughout my years of growing up in the industry, I've seen my family go through many hardships. Layoffs, my dad being laid off, boats being tied up, and I've heard for years, decades growing up, all the companies going broke, they're not making any money. They beat that horse to death. You've got the same major players that has been in existence for many, many years. You got the same families and family ties that owns interest in some type of control in the industry. So there's got to be money that was made and being made today. They have taken about everything away they possibly could from, and if you bring this up to management, they're going to say, well, so has, corporate America. Do you want to run your business like corporate America? Or do you want to be, if you claim to be the leader, do you want to stand out and lead and have a company where people really wants to come to work for you? And it may be a question of more money. When you stop and think about skilled laborers today, I've got a friend of mine that makes $100 an hour more than I make an hour doing plumbing work. There's delivery companies paying $70, $80 an hour now, a little bit more than what I make, or in the same neighborhood. So we're going to have to stop and back up and look at it from an entry level position, a deckhand, and say, okay, we're trying to recruit this guy here to work out here, to be gone 30 days at a time. What are we going to offer him? Well, the same bland benefit package that everybody else does in the industry, because they always compare themselves to each other. And with the pickup of your phone, that same prospect that could be hired is sitting here looking through, well, this ag company's paying this much an hour, and I've got this insurance, and I've got this benefit. Why should I leave home? Yeah, I've got to work every day, but I'm going to making 2/3 the money working here than I will on the river. So I think that's where technology is not so much an industry favor anymore, and the younger generation is utilizing these tools. you're going to have to make it yourself stand out. And companies ain't doing it. And that's where we have a retention problem today of older employees.
Well, aside from Kenny Brown's efforts with the Maritime Throwdown, and of course, Aaron Howard previously with Reverse Discovery and now with We Work the Waterways, how would both of you recommend the industry improve recruiting and retention? How do we make this attractive to the new generations?
What do you think, Chief? One, we're going to have to, I think, it's definitely going to be a financial thing.
Mm-hmm.
And with the scare of Social Security, the markets, I think those younger men and women out there that's looking at a career, they're thinking about, I see what mom and dad did, and we're going to have to put money back, and we're going to have to do this, and we're going to have to do that. So there's going to have to be an upplay in benefits. Maybe different work rotations. That's a hard call, but we're going to have to start prospecting a lot different too, and looking for, the ones that has the better work ethic. And we'll get into more about that in a minute. What do you think, Chief?
I almost got kicked out of one of the office meetings over this question.
I have been asked to leave a few times.
They wouldn't know how to recruit and what to do and how to attract and the whole bit. My answer was, how about take better care of the employees you already have so you don't have to recruit so much?
Mm-hmm.
That was not a good answer. I think it's a good answer.
I do too.
But they do not.
Why do
seem to
people
think
leave?
that.
I mean,
Yep. Take care of what you already have.
I think we were seeing a couple of years ago, like a 50% turnover on all the new deckhand classes. In 1 year, I think 52% had come and gone after one
crazy.
hitch.
Yeah.
And the amount of money the companies spend to do that is unreal.
So it'd be smarter to take care of the ones you already have.
Tim, this is something I learned at some leadership meetings years ago, and I've carried it with me. And it wasn't even in the toy industry. As a matter of fact, I was facilitating a meeting, and it was a safety meeting. It was a big local company here where I live. And I was listening to one of the speakers then say, what does it take to be a good supervisor? And then they went in and said, what does it take to be a good upper management supervisor? What does it take to be a good investor? What does it take to be a good owner? And they went through the spiel very deep, and I listened. And on my end of it, one of them is knowing being able to read your body language, being able to read, him or his or her, the person that comes on the boat to work, and being personally involved in one-on-one, talk to them, find out where they live, what they like to do. There's so much you can learn from that. And that's a lot of this is going to have to start improving our skills on the boat as captains, pilots, chiefs, mates, and carried through corporate end. Because we look at the retention issues today, we look at the kids' behavior today, we're looking at all this stuff, but who's the actual blame for it? Everyone wants to look at each other.
Yep.
You're looking at the ones. When you look at each other, you're actually looking at the ones to blame, me and you. We raised these kids.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes those kids have raised other kids. So how are we going to work with these little monsters to redefine, redevelop, and re-educate them to be productive in the workforce. And that's going to be some skill knowledge that's going to be taught in leadership meetings. And it's going to cost companies some money to do this, but it's going to have to be done and done soon and be really receptive. Because if it's not and not practiced, then that gap's going to keep getting bigger that we've got now.
Well, that's sort of a grander societal issue more than just the maritime industry.
It is,
So
but it
that's
affects
gonna,
us.
what's that?
But it really affects us.
Well, sure, it affects, yeah, everybody everywhere, I think.
But every business is suffering from this right now. I mean, you look around, there's help wanted signs everywhere. I've never seen so many businesses starving for workers. I can remember growing up, we used to fight over who was going to mow whose yard for $5.
Yep.
You know, now you can walk out there and get a job damn near anywhere, doing anything, with or without experience.
Well, I know that work ethic is out there. We had a kid years ago in our neighborhood that was walking around cutting yards, saving money, I think, for some kind of vacation, Disney trip or something he wanted. So it does exist, but I'm afraid it's more rare than not. But if you had an unlimited budget and a brand new deckhand or a crew of deckhands, two, three, four guys get on your boat, and it's their first trip, how do you, as the leader on that boat, steer them toward a lasting career?
Number one, take personal interest in each one of them. That starts a foundation there like no other. You have to treat everybody with mutual respect. Even though it's hard to do sometimes, you have to give them that individual one-on-one attention they may need. We could write a book on that topic right there alone.
What percentage of new guys getting on the boat just don't have the potential, just don't have it to make it out there?
To be honestly, I would say about 65% of what's hired that went through the process to be hired.
That's a surprising number. I didn't expect it to be that high. But how long has it been that way?
5 years, 8 years, and it's growing.
And it's continually getting worse.
You know, I can remember back prior company I worked with, they seemed to focus on hiring small community farm communities. You get these boys and girls that work on the farm, they come out there on the boats when they worked. And whereas other areas, not so much. I think we really need to look at the demographics of the areas that they're hiring from. I've never been a fan of hiring over the phone. I like personal interviews, or at least what we're doing now even. And I think it would benefit the companies better. And I know they're under a crunch to have that number count on the boat, but a lot of them don't teach the basics in the deckhand training programs when they're hired on. They're pushed through a couple of days. They go through a couple of days of paperwork, a couple of days of HR, then they're turned loose and sent to a boat. I think that needs to be backed up and slowed down to a 2-week program again. If not, maybe, and me and a couple others have talked about this when I was in Paducah the other day, start developing schools that's certified to teach by the Coast Guard and train, and see who's going to go through 6 months of schooling maybe. And if they do that, they're liable to pay more respect to staying with the company once hired on, if the company treats them right. So I'm thinking we're going to have to lean more toward land-based education centers for new hire crews in the near future, and let them do the prospecting, the goal setting, and working with the companies for potential employment. That may take a burden off of the companies too.
How much more difficult is it for you to encourage and develop deckhands with the existing company policies and safety programs and stuff like that?
Most of them with company policy, and the safety programs that we have, and I'm going to say this with with 3 companies I worked for. One of them was 20 years. That's the easy part. Everybody wants to be safe. Nobody wants to get hurt intentionally. And if they're out there any length of time, they want to learn. Now you get those that don't want to learn, they shouldn't have been hired to start with.
Well, and in closing, the third topic you mentioned to me the other night was the decline in boatmanship and pride in the job. What have you seen over the years, and what's different that you want to discuss today?
Well, there's been back in the day when companies treated the men right, seemingly, and I'm hearing this from old timers. This is the old timers that's been retired for a few years perspective. Well, we could beat these guys today 2 days getting northbound from New Orleans to St. Louis or Cairo. Didn't use tugs at locks. We always roped them in. We didn't use tugs at bridges. Until a generation that has slowly developed, or not a generation, but a line of, say, wheelmen that has become to say, can't land on that bridge, or you can't do that, or you can't do this, and if you do this, the company's going to do that, and if you don't use that tug, then if you have an accident, they're going first thing they'll ask you, well, how come you didn't use that tug sitting there? Well, you've got a lot more cautious maybe pilot today that's utilizing tugs instead of doing it old school ways. This day and time, steel is expensive, downtime's expensive, and a $1,000 tug is pretty damn cheap, all in all, because not only is the risk, say you go down there and you land in the bridge and you bust some timbers up and that's all you've done, that could be $200,000-300,000 easy. A lot of rail companies and bridge owners are not only suing the company, but they're suing the pilot or the wheelman as well. So why wouldn't you not use that? Back in the day, that didn't happen. Back in the day, on the lower, you ran a lot of shortcuts. This day and time, well, they don't tell you can, they don't tell you you can't. But if you ever get caught and mess up back in there doing a shortcut, well, the company's going to fire your ass, number one. You shouldn't have been there. That's what they're going to say. The Corps is going to raise hell because you probably created damage to the dike or whatever you've run over. Then the Coast Guard. Then you got EPA issues more than likely. So a lot of people started running the gut, not taking that chance. If I'm running here on the sail line in the middle of the channel, then if I have an accident, by God, I've done all I could do. Takes the question out of it. And I think in turn, the pride has reflected not only in the wheelhouse, in the engine room, it goes to the deck crew, or, Who cares if the bell gets polished or the horns get polished and the floor gets whacked or, the engines get wiped down or, the shaft alleys get clean. I'm very fortunate on my boat. This guy right here does it pretty much by itself, has an immaculate engine room. And the boat is well kept. How we survived this last trip, I do not know.
Yeah, winging a prayer.
But we got off with the boat in a hell of a lot better shape than it was left in when we got on. I think that's a lot of it. Throughout the years, the cautions, the warnings, the ifs, the ands, the buts, the don'ts, the what ifs, lawsuits. Yeah, we've become not so much lacking our skill, but we're going to utilize whatever we can to lessen the risk factor because we are preached that and have been the last 15 years. And it shows. I've worked and broke in probably 5 line boat pilots, on my 5th one right now. Ryan's doing a really good job. We don't use Rose Point electronic chart all the time. He has to use old school chart, but that's how I learned. When we have capable deck crew to do it, we're going to be roping in locks because he needs to know that. There's wheelmen out there today that has been taught to run a boat only by electronic chart and the use of tugs, no old school stuff, period. And that's where we're losing ground. We're losing good boatmanship when we do that.
Well,
They
and
do the
another,
same thing with engineering.
Same thing in the industry.
Same
Yeah.
thing in engineering.
Something breaks.
Pick up the phone.
Yeah, this man is capable of fixing about anything that happens. He picks up the phone. Let us get somebody out there.
Yep. It is warranty work now. They do not make a old school chief engineer anymore. They make somebody.
What?
Nope. Nope, but they do not.
A lot of the old chiefs didn't wear a headset or ear protection. You had to scream in their ear.
Yeah.
Or they was good at ignoring you.
Yeah, there's good possibility there, but it's just one that everything is under warranty now. So you got to pick up that phone instead of doing it. It is just one now that we do not make a good chief like they used to be, but it is just one of them things that up underneath the warranty work, the time, the whole bit, as long as you can keep that boat clean, you keep it fueled, you keep the small maintenance done, that is fine. It is one that you are not taught, and we do not do it anymore, and you kind of lose those skills anymore on when you need to replace like a power pack and stuff. It's just one of those things that if you do not do it every now and then,
if you don't
use
it, you lose it.
Yes.
And we're losing it out there.
And we are losing it out there, in the engine room also. It's the same way with the deck crew. I said the deck crew, when I started, we used to go out there and we would throw lines, at the cabals and this. We would play like horse out there with line. We probably batted back and forth $1,000, just $1 to throw, just to hoop things. The deck crew does not do that anymore. It went from
you can't get them to.
The deck crew went from having the TV now to having your cell phone. It's just one of those things that now if you ask them to do whatever, if it can't be done on that cell phone and you actually have to physically do it, now it is a big effort. I don't know. The whole industry's really changed.
And that's one thing I want to point out right now, if it's okay, Tim. The Maritime Throwdown is working really hard to do and redefine the professional mariner. Kenny is doing an outstanding job, and I support him 110% in what his effort is. is to bring back the old school line handling. That is so cool, and I support him 100% on that.
Mhm.
Well, gentlemen, I do appreciate your time here this morning. I do hope too that this podcast project in some aspect may contribute to some positive change, be a catalyst for some kind of progress here. So I appreciate you sharing your opinions. What do you think about this little podcast I'm doing?
Tim, I love it. When you first started, a friend of mine said, "Hey, you seen this guy?" And I listened to a couple of them. I'm thinking, I kind of like this. Kind of like what I started doing with TikTok. I mean, I done it to educate the general person about the river, what it is, where to find it, and what we do. And you're really fine tuning everything, and you're bringing the industry together.
Well, I sure hope so. Again, guys, thanks very much. We'll keep in touch with you.
Thanks,
All right,
Tim.
thank you now.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.